I'm Beverly Clark, and I kind of volunteered to talk about working with children who have been traumatized and just all the issues that they can bring with them to school and home and into the community. Because once you start realizing how many children there are who basically they figure about half of all children, like about 35 million children under age 8 have gone through one or another trauma situation. Another thing that I think is that most of us are pretty unaware of, and I teach early childhood, so we talk a lot about different ways that we work with children who are making it difficult to teach in their variety of ways. But in K-12 education, when you have so many more children per class, it's really a whole different situation. And I worked K-12 for 30 years, I guess. So before I came here, really my background was more with school age than it was with preschool, except I started up the preschools in the school district I worked with. So then I had to become the director of it because nobody else had early childhood. Isn't that shocking? So actually there's some programs available to work in K-12 for people who were really interested in preschool or who don't want to go the rest of the way and get the variety of credentials and extra stuff you need. So I wanted to start out tonight talking a little bit about what we mean by children who've been traumatized and who are having a variety of issues because of it. One of the reasons, besides teaching early childhood, that I became extra interested about it is because my granddaughter suffered a lot of trauma as a child. And then in puberty, as other things happened, I'll just tell you a little bit because we only have an hour. Her mother passed away the first week of her freshman year. And that same year, she was walking with two other friends, and one of her friends was hit by a hit and run driver, and that friend died. So that's a whole different kind of trauma than having issues with parents at home. And that's one of the things they bring up a lot is that everybody, I think if we had time, if we were in a class, we went around the room and I said, have you ever worked with a child who you were worried about, who you thought might have gone through a traumatic situation? Have any of your family members? I mean, just putting all the options out there so nobody needed to reveal anything personal. But I think every single person has had a family member or has been a special child they care about or worked with a child who maybe they didn't know what was causing the behavior issues or the shyness or whatever. They were thinking things weren't developmentally appropriate. There's something going on. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So I think most people, unless they really start getting interested in this topic in their own minds, because we talk more about child abuse and child neglect than we do about the whole wider variety of ways that children can end up being traumatized. I think it's good to think about that there are way more ways. Parents going through a divorce, parents in the military, and they're moving every few months or years, changing schools all the time, changing friends can add on to an issue that may already be there. Just some of us grew up with louder arguments than others of us. And all children are just as unique as you all are. So some of them aren't really prepared to handle that kind of stress. They react to it more depending on who they are and where they've grown up and the community around them. So if it's only happening in one aspect of their life, that might get scarier as time goes by. Or if when there's an addiction involved, either to drugs or alcohol or any variety of substances, same thing. So most of the time, maybe the parent is fine, but at times they're not, and the child never knows when that's going to happen. Doesn't feel very safe, does it? So those are all kinds of things that I think I hadn't really thought of the broader children who've had a lot of physical health issues, who've been in the hospital many times, who've had to have painful surgeries or where they don't know what's going on. And so they've gone through test after test after test. And it's frightening because they don't really understand why. Just almost so many things. I know we all would think, yes, if I was an immigrant in the United States, there'd be a lot of reasons to be fearful. If I was put in one of the places they're holding children as a refugee, plenty of reason to be stressed. And again, thinking about child abuse and child neglect, again, we recognize that right away, that if we knew about it, we'd understand why the child might be a behavior problem or might be extra shy around adults they don't really know very well, quicker to want to spend time only with people they felt really confident about. If you start looking for traumas with children, another term that a lot of the research uses is maltreatment rather than using the term abuse. And maltreatment and these trauma issues pretty much have the same definition, that it's when children don't feel safe, when children are hurt, either verbally or physically, emotionally, that it's obviously not a good thing. So I hope that kind of broadens your thoughts about that. So it doesn't always have to be things that happen. It can be a child's fear that something's going to happen again, or that a situation is going to occur where that they're fearful about. I think how widespread it is was very surprising to me, and that for many children, there isn't a lot that people outside of the family know about until they start having issues as an adult, either mentally or physically. There are a lot of physical complaints that start showing up as adults when you've had traumatic issues as a child. And I had never really heard that at all. Who's most at risk? Just like child abuse and neglect, it's the youngest children, infants and toddlers, the highest, and children under 3. I know that's sad for all of us when we even think about that, but that's the age group. So are they really going to be able to tell us very much verbally? They're under 3? No. So that's another issue for teachers and for people that might be looking for ways to help, because you're really going to have to go by how the child's behaving, or maybe what changes in their behavior, to be able to tell what's changing, what's happening for them. So just another kind of problematically, I think I already said, they estimate half of all children in the United States, about 35 million, are exposed to at least one type of trauma prior to age 8. That surprised me too. I think the other issue is adults don't think about the trauma they get exposed to. And that if you're either working with children that you're trying to help, or you're in a situation where you're giving care for another adult, and you're putting a lot of your efforts into that caregiving, that a lot more self-care is needed. Teachers need to be thinking about self-care anyway, because you put so much emotionally into your job. But when you're also in your own life, or you've got many children in your classroom that have been traumatized, now you're using even more energy that can end up making you very tired. And some children that sleep a lot in class, that's just their way of bowing out. They have learned there's a lot less that's hurtful when they're asleep, and they're tired from struggling with everything all the time. So it's like our second language learners. It's very tiring to learn another language while trying to keep up and figure out what's going on all the time in class. And if you've ever taken another language or you've been in another country for a time, it wears out. It makes you so tired because your brain is having to work really hard all the time. So I know, because I tried to, I've got 14 units in Khmer, and I really wanted to learn the language because all of my students were Cambodian when I was teaching high school. And I don't have good ears for hearing the differences in languages. So I learned a really big lesson. I learned how tiring it was, and I also learned a lot about the differences between the two languages. But I also learned how all of us just don't have the same ability to learn more than one language. Oh, it's kind of got wires here. Maybe, oh, well, you'll have to step really high. Anyhow, it's tiring. And when you see children be getting very tired in class, that might be one of your clues that they're having some issues with stress. It's also a problem that it accumulates over time. So there may be a time that was already stressful, and then when you hit another part of your life when it's stressful again, you kind of go back to where you were. We all handle things differently. Children do too. Some children are much more sensitive than other children. But then you hit other times, and maybe although they seem to have made it through without any problem through their childhood, when they hit puberty or they hit young adulthood, when they have a lot more responsibility, it can throw them for a loop. So that can make it hard for young children to be with an adult going through a lot of issues, because then we're not being consistent and we're not thinking about the children as much because and I think, again, in everybody's case, there's times when other people in your life need your help, and that changes everything you're doing. Anyway, one of those things to think about. And ongoing stress, ongoing maltreatment, whatever term you want to use, ongoing trauma is going to, in all cases, make it more and more difficult for a child to do what they need to do, because in the meantime, they're growing up and it's just more than they can handle. So when there isn't a protector in or with them, sometimes one parent is more of a protector than another. Sometimes it's the parents themselves that are causing the maltreatment, but there's another relative who is a good listener and offers some safety. It's a different situation for every child. So that's something we always think about, because really young children, we're lucky in early childhood, we have more people working with the children. So we have an opportunity to spend more time with them. once you're in K-12 education, you're typically, when I was teaching high school, I had 45 kids every period, because I had second language learners and I was teaching history. So I taught all levels of history, and I had that many students in every class. My own children thought I was crazy for being a teacher. But for preschool, we typically have 3 people in a room. Well, if I'm concerned about a child and I'm the head teacher, I can ask others who I think will be helpful and that maybe the child has shown that they can trust, to help out. But in the regular kindergarten classroom, my daughter's taught kindergarten now for 13 years. There's only one teacher and not typically anybody else. And she's lucky. She teaches in Alameda. She only has 24 in her classes, but she has no help other than parents, usually at the beginning of the year. And then because so many families both are working, so who does she go to? Most elementary schools don't have counselors. They certainly aren't there every day. They're not going to be there every time a child needs to have somebody to be there. So it's hard in regular education. Okay, so what should we look out for in any age? Children that seem fearful, children that duck when something surprising happens close to them, children that are quick to attack if it seems like somebody's coming at them, children who are deep into fantasy and sometimes seem to not know when they need to be in reality versus fantasy. So being watchful about that, because they want to be somewhere else. They can go somewhere else in their heads. That a lot of adults only think about adults who've been in a lot of traumatic situations having a post-traumatic stress syndrome. But children have it too, especially when children have been traumatized young. So those same issues are with the child, and they can be struggling with that for the rest of their lives. I think many adults who have a variety of health issues, if they knew more about what happens when you're traumatized as a child, they'd realize that some of what's happening as an adult goes back to that childhood and to maybe their own personal sensitivity. And I'll get to that more when we talk about what can we do. I'm not going on too long, am I? Another thing that I didn't realize, as I say, besides teaching ECE, I'm interested personally. I want to know more about it. My granddaughter's been in pain for over 2 years now. Doctors could never figure out what was going on. Now they're saying it's related to too many issues as she's been a child. So it can cause permanent changes in the brain that you may not recover. It all depends again on who you are and who you're with, and if things change or you get help, how old you were. It's a new field, and if they didn't have fMRIs and all of the research things they have available now, they wouldn't even know that. Because for so long, they've just been coming up with kind of general terms. So everybody who has stomach issues has irritable bowel syndrome, or has Crohn's disease, or has something. But does it ever get better? Or does it move to other places? There just hasn't been very much follow-up for a lot of adults and a lot of children. They know something's wrong, but nothing they can pinpoint through blood tests, urine tests, any of that kind of thing. So they suffer neurologically. And then, as you know, if you're working with children already, they suffer emotionally and behaviorally because they're not behaving the way they would have if they hadn't been through all these experiences. And they're probably lacking a lot of faith and trust in adults in their lives if it's been adults who have caused the trauma. And I'll get to that. I'll come back to that in a minute. But that when now we categorize children as being autistic, as having ADD and ADHD, attention deficit and attention deficit with hyperactivity. A lot of children who have been in many traumatic situations of children get labeled with some of these other things that then give them a chance, or they already were displaying some behaviors that let them recede from the rest of the world, that gave them a place to go, or that gave teachers and parents a reason to think there was only this one thing going on, not something else, because maybe they themselves don't realize. What child would be thinking about their parents getting divorced causing them to have a traumatic experience? And that doesn't happen to every child. It's a combination, like everything else with us and with children. It's not one thing that makes us who we are, it's everything. And I bet most of you have heard the term epigenetic, where our environment is changing, can change our genetic structure. This is another instance of that. Now they know that you could inherit genetically issues that make you more susceptible to taking in traumatic events and it being more bothersome to you, or your genetic structure being changed by many experiences that make it more important to protect yourself from the world, which I've worked with some autistic children. I could, that kind of comes home to me. We keep saying, why do we have so many more children? I think there's a variety of reasons, including some environmental ones, but that's just my theory. But now that I'm reading this, it might help explain why so many more children are being diagnosed with ADD and ADHD and autism. Just a thought. Okay. So I think I said this already, but I'm going to say it again because then I'm going to move on. There really is no typical response to having had a lot of trauma, whether it was when you were very young or when you were older, because we're all different. So we're all going to have different results from those traumatic situations. Really bad accidents, a death in the family, just so many things can push us, and sometimes we can recover our balance, and other times maybe we can't, as adults too. And think, as adults, we have way more capability. Children are really just so vulnerable. They have so few places to go to get help. So the child themselves is the biggest part, how they're going to react. And then their family, and who's in their neighborhood. Do they live in a stable neighborhood where people aren't shooting at each other all the time? One of the apartment complexes where our Cambodian community was for many, many years, and where we had one of our preschools, was nobody went there from the school on weekends because people came from Oakland and other places, and it was dangerous. And parents who were thinking about keeping their kids alive shut the door on Fridays, and the kids didn't come back out until it was time for school. So if you live in that kind of a neighborhood, the neighborhood's not going to help you feel safer, right? So that's a factor. It doesn't mean we all get to choose where we live, but we can take in that that could be a factor in the children's behavior. Um, that idea of there is a balance between the risk factors in your life and in your world and the protective factors, because there's so much more all around us every day in our lives, but also in the media and around us. At school, I don't think I'd want to teach high school anymore. There's been 2 kids hit in the parking lot this week, and there's been 3 fights after school in the street. That's part of life now. Kids have to face a lot of stress in school. Sometimes we find out about it, sometimes we don't. Some schools are more protective than other schools. Anyway, so what can we do? I don't have any, what do they call it? I have no silver bullets for this. There are too many ways children can be traumatized, and there's too much that's really about the relationships you can build with them and how long they get to have protective relationships. One thing I do know is that as educators, we can't be there all the time. We can do the best we can when we have the children. We can do the best we can to help them be more resilient and to find ways to feel safer. But I think we're kidding ourselves and we're kidding the children if we try to say more than that, because they are going to go home and we're not going with them. And as good-hearted as most teachers are, that's tough. But kids don't get that. They get being safe and being in a safe classroom, and that is very helpful. They get a consistent, hopeful, positive experience in the classroom, and that's helpful. But if children think, because you're so caring, that we're going to be able to change the rest of their life, they need to learn how to do that, and we need to learn how to do better with parents in the community, because there's a lot of support in the community for parents and families. If we're really concerned, we can't just be good at what we do in the classroom. We've got to know the resources to help families get involved with. If they need counseling, we need to know where they can go, where there won't be any fees, and where people will try to help them. We just had an early childhood advisory council meeting on Tuesday. Family Resource and Referral came. Child Abuse Prevention Council came. We asked a lot of questions. In my professionalism class was the question askers. There's free counseling. Child abuse prevention does respite care. I'm worried when I send a child home that when mom came to get that child, she was slamming things around, and I'm thinking, this is not going to be a good day. If I have built any kind of relationship with that parent, maybe if I explain that there's respite care at child abuse prevention, she might go and use it and get signed up for some help and for counseling for her child and for herself. No charge. It's not that kind of resource, but it's a resource where they would look into trying to help right then. I'm having a bad time. We had a big custody fight as parents over the child. Every time we're trading the kids off, there's a big fight. Child abuse prevention takes care of that too. You can switch kids there in a room that kids can play in. So if it has to be supervised, it can be there rather than the scary stuff going on in a parking lot where they're trying to trade off, but another fight gets started. So I'm not saying there's an answer to everything, but when we talk about mandated reporting, we talk about what are the two reasons for even being a mandated reporter. One is to report when we know a child's being hurt anyway, that they could be hurt. But the other reason is to get help for the people that are doing it. Because if they don't get help, they're the child's family. They are going to be there for the rest of their lives. They're the ones who need our patience. And it's so hard because it makes us feel so crummy to know that a child's in that situation. But I'm telling you, that's what will help make a bigger difference, is to build up your relationship, not with the child, yes, but with the family too, so that they can get to some better things. I forgot it wasn't supposed to be. I think that's a microphone. So we're always talking about that in early childhood. What are the resources? And do we know the current status of it? I asked child abuse prevention if they were still doing counseling, because it is for children and adults. A lot of times parents have no idea where to go. And programs can help find better housing, can help find where food's available. All of that adds to parent stress. And if they're already too stressed, it sometimes gets taken out on the children. That's only one of the situations, but it still makes a difference. Folks who have too many children and don't seem to know how that happens are another issue. If you really don't enjoy being with children, you certainly shouldn't keep having them. And shoving them off on other relatives, or just realizing that you're not paying any attention. It's helpful for people to know about other places to go. And yes, we have to be sensitive about cultural issues and religion. We have to, it's not like we're pushing people, but sometimes information is helpful. So the primary prevention of children being traumatized to such an extent is all of that stuff in the beginning that we hope is going to happen. And then the secondary prevention is what we do as educators, spotting the warning signs, trying to intervene so that the situation doesn't get worse, helping caregivers give better care, or to get their addictions treated, whatever they need to do. And what do we do for the children? We recognize that maybe some of the behaviors that we're seeing in the classroom are just behaviors because of how they're treated at home or what they're seeing at home, that maybe they need to continue to see positive role models. They need to hear that they can be smart. They are smart. They can be successful at school, because many children give up on those things when they're constantly, that emotional abuse is just as damaging as any of the other abuses. because it takes away that child's confidence. So that's one that we can really be helpful in, because not all teachers are. So sometimes we can be the significant adult. If you've looked into resilient factors at all, that's one of the big ones, is having a significant adult in your life. Somebody who doesn't just care for you, but is doing the rah-rah thing. You are smart. You are good at that. I'm here to help you if you need help. Having a future focus, knowing that the rest of your life doesn't have to be like it is right now. It can be better. You can make it better, is helpful to children, because they sometimes don't know it's any different. If children only see what they see in their own family, how do they know that other people aren't living that way? So helping children see another way. And another aspect of that is knowing that we can make a difference is from the very beginning. For instance, if any of you were working with infants and toddlers, is making sure those infants and toddlers have a strong attachment to a significant adult. It doesn't have to be a parent. It can be the caregiver if they're in a caregiving situation. But without that attachment, that child isn't going to have any resilience to those traumatic events later, because you've got to have that to even want to be surviving everything that gets thrown at you in our world. The strongest protective factor is having somebody reliable that and responsible that you can depend on, that isn't going to change on you. That's another thing that we can do as educators. Our classrooms should be consistent. They should be positive. They should be, well, we used to always say, I had 11 preschools, that, no matter what kind of day I'm having, I walk in that door to work with the children, I've got to drop any kind of attitude I had going on. It doesn't matter whether I had a flat tire or if what, because it's not fair to bring our stress into the classroom and lay it on the kids. Our tone changes, we might not even hear it. The whole classroom environment changes if we change. And that's what they count on. They count on us being the same and being fair and consistent all the time. And maybe that isn't what they get at home. So now you're a great role model too. And they can see that all adults, I don't have to be worried about this adult because I can trust they're always going to be here this way. Does that make sense? Because kids can't think through some of the things that you think through, so that you can let go of things that are scary and traumatizing. But kids don't have that capability as they're going along. So let's see, what else is on my list? Sensitive to them. I know in a regular classroom, you're not going to have a lot of time for one-on-one, but if a child really needs to have time with you, maybe they could help you clean up the boards after school. Maybe they could have a few minutes helping you do things, and in the meantime, talking about what's scary in their lives. Kids do talk about things when they find somebody they feel they can trust. We shouldn't ever tell them we're not going to tell anybody else, that it'll be our secret, because we might not be able to keep that secret if the child's injured. We don't want to ever break promises because other people have already done that to these children. So we want to be really upfront. So it's important to be who you are. And if it's a really bad day for you, it's not wrong to say, you know what, my mom fell today and I need to go to the hospital later. I know we talked about you staying after and us visiting, and I'm really sorry, but I'm going to have to go because that's my responsibility. That's not wrong, right? But it would be wrong to just disappear because you are trying to build that bond with them. And they're not going to, it's not the same as with a friend that you were going to meet and things change. And you know they're going to understand when you tell them. You need to explain to children right away. And we need to be careful not to make promises we can't keep, because that's breaking down what you've tried to build up. We really want to help protect them from more trauma if we can do that. We want to make our classrooms feel safe. And if there are angry people in our environment, and I see that happen in some of the schools I'm in, we can't get into conversations with other adults when we're working with the children, but we need to have some conversation with adults that make our classroom not feel safe, because angry people can really trigger children who've already been traumatized. So it's our responsibility for our classroom to feel safe. It should feel safe for all the children and for you. And adults ought to know better. And I know it's not fun to complain to adults, and you don't want to do it in front of the children, but you don't want it to happen again. So you could suggest you meet with them at another time, but that just shouldn't happen. You're trying to help the children. You're trying to restore that sense of safety, and that's not helping. What else? Gosh, we say over and over, be a good role model, and that's hard to fake. And I believe most people who go into education are going into education for the right reasons, um, because they do care about the children and they want to uh, be a good educator and do the best they can. That's part of their goal, is to do a good job, right? Because we have children in our lives that we care about. We don't want them to be in a situation that isn't positive. So think about that. You know, that's how I look at schools and educators and almost everything I do. Is it good enough for the child that's so special to me? If it isn't, then it's not good enough for the other children either. It really is standards, and always thinking, at that level, and that the kids are always watching and listening to us. So even when we're not in the classroom, you want to keep your cool. Unfortunately, there's a lot of what some of us would call the wrong kind of language in schools and here and everywhere. That doesn't mean we need to use it too in front of children and other people's children, because that's sending the wrong message. And so many times that kind of language is used when people are angry. So that's really important. Let's see what time is. Oh, goodness. So I forgot to even check, see what you were thinking. I have some resources that were too lengthy to just turn into a one page, but Amit is taping this for people to use with online classes, and he's going to put it up on Moodle, and he's going to put the resources up on Moodle. I found a really good resource that I hadn't run into before, called How to Implement Trauma-Informed Care to Build Resilience to Childhood Trauma. And she has a great list of endnotes. I mean, it's pages, because I have it printed back to back. So it's like 8 pages long of endnotes. So interesting. I have another one. I get things from Camille Catlett, who was a professor for many years and worked in early childhood. She sends research articles to people that are on her listserv. And this is another one called Building Resilience Resources for Supporting Young Children Who Have Experienced Trauma and Maltreatment and Their Families. And it is pages long, and it's all resources. So you can look, and if it's in English and Spanish, it's been highlighted. The rest are all in English, but you can see it's like 10 pages long. And I didn't know how many people might be watching in Modesto and who all was going to be. So I figured it'd be good on Moodle. But my email is bclark@humphreyscourse.edu. So if you want to get in touch with me, I can send them to you right away, but I believe it'll be up on Moodle too, anytime. Or I think everybody's emails in the sign up. If you want to just let us know you'd like these, I'll make them available. I just didn't want to make a bunch and maybe waste paper. There's also, I have a one-page sheet from Camille Catlett too on gender, because guess what? Anything that makes you feel different from other people also can lead to trauma. Discrimination over and over through the years can make you feel traumatized. Going another way than where society says we belong can add to the trauma you're dealing with every day and the children. So you think that a variety of things as a child makes you different than other people, that comes out. One of the things Taylor got really annoyed about is people giving her assignments where she was supposed to do this or that around her mother without giving her any other options. And she'd be like, Graham, they did it again. They were wanting me to write an essay, and then we had to do it out loud, and he called on me first. So what do I have to do? I have to get up and say, my mom passed away. Why do we do that? I know we don't know their personal histories, but maybe we should get to know them a little better before we make them feel different. Because then what happens at school? Everybody's asking you questions. Maybe you don't want to talk about it that much yet, or maybe you're never going to want to talk about it at school. It's just thinking ahead. And this is another issue. So those are my resources. And as I said, if you put, because this is a whole new field, there are clinics. The one that we're going to go to next month is in San Francisco at the University of California at San Francisco. There's a children's hospital that has a clinic specifically for chronic amplified pain, and it's for children, which is just crazy that there's that much trauma and pain involved for children over what happens in their usually early childhood. So something to think about. All right, I think that's it. And I have a class, so it was, you were a very good audience. Thank you for coming. And let me know if you have any questions.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
To get a physical copy of that information, where do I, can I get it from you?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, and what would that be? Where can I pop in to get a copy?
In the faculty office, and I have a faculty mailbox. Yeah, I could put some in there.
So I didn't know my email.
Oh,
Can I give you a different one?
Sure. Oh, yeah.
And it's gonna be on Moodle tonight, or yours gonna upload it
Oh,
tomorrow?
no, I'm sure it won't be there tonight.
Maybe tomorrow?
We don't really know, do we?
Maybe like tomorrow.
Yeah, I'll call him.
Yeah.
If not, I'm gonna put my email on there
Okay.
and then, someone take care.
Oh,
we
took
we're
the sign-in sheet?
passed around.
Oh.
I'll put my,
Okay.
email on there. And then, you said it's B. Clark.
Oh, and people are asking when we think